My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of Rebuild North Bay Foundation. This podcast is specifically designed to bring you people who have been through what maybe you have just gone through or that you are concerned about. We created the podcast How to Disaster to show you the breadth and depth of humanity in the midst of this really terrible thing that happened. I wanted to do this podcast so that I could bring some of the most amazing leaders that I've ever known in my life to you. You may have just experienced a disaster, and you may be looking around and you are dealing with trauma and the shock of it. And you may be wondering, I don't know how to do this part. And so we purposefully made this podcast into different sections and different topics of recovery so that you could pick and choose what would work for you at that time. So welcome to How to Disaster, and thank you for giving us your time. Welcome to another episode of How to Disaster, a podcast to help you recover, rebuild, and reimagine. Today, I'm ecstatic to have with us Peter Allen. And Peter Allen is an artist and a friend and an ally of Rebuild. If you look right over my shoulder, you will see one of his pieces of art that says Fire Exit. It's always in my studio. I didn't just put it up there today because my friend was coming over. I really love it. And I think that one of the reasons I wanted to have Peter with us today is he has this especially beautiful heart and this ability to take something that was very painful and a huge personal and professional loss to him. And he has, since the date of the fires in October of 2018, he's been able to take pieces of his life and turn them into things of beauty. And so I want to welcome you, Peter. Thank you so much for spending this day with us.
Beautiful. Thank you for that introduction, Jennifer. You're so excellent. It's so mutual and reciprocal too. And I am grateful, ecstatic as well, and very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. It's a big honor and privilege. And we're going to knock this out of the park.
We are. I was very happy to do this. What are you messing with over there, Peter? You guys stop messing with stuff. You don't have to cut this out. It's fine.
Notes in case I need a reference for something. I'm going to try to keep this not too academic or professorial or an art history lesson. But yeah, you set that up perfectly. I want to keep it real personal. I'm humble, but I'm also just, I'm so ridiculously happy right now. Mostly to do with 2020, and we can get to that part too.
The next thing is that, can you just give us a short bio, who you are, how you came to be, all those things. Let's just hear the story of Peter really briefly before we go into the rest of our interview.
Sure. Yeah. My introduction, who I am. My name is Peter Allen. I'm a mixed media visual conceptual artist. I've been doing this professionally for about 20 years now, originally from Southern California. Although I always had a tutor and coach, and my mom always was involving me with art since I was a little kid. She's an artist herself, as well as her mother and my grandmother. And then I also have a cousin, Douglas Tenapple. He's a very accomplished animator. He's currently in Nashville, Tennessee area. So art has always been a part of me, and it's been a lifestyle of mine. I'm very introspective. I'm very into the psychology. I also have a psychology and history backing to my fine art degree from Sonoma State, where I did my undergrad. After that, I went to Italy, and I did a spiritual retreat center there where I served for a community, mostly to do with my spiritual path. But then I met a gal in Rome, and she invited me to be a guest to one of her artist friends who was a very accomplished painter. Did a lot of these kind of fresco, the old style of Italian painting, and I got to be somewhat of a mentor from him. And that's when I realized that I wanted to do professionally. So when I returned to California 6 months after that time, I established myself doing art. I had a studio. At that time, I was in the Cotati area, which is near Sonoma State. And I was also working with the department inside the tool crib with John Scott Forrester. And I was around students. And so I just love to be around art with other artists. And that's where I think I really kind of grew up and I was really ready for. I was 29, almost 30, right around there. And then one of my best friends, Frank Ryan, is an excellent painter down in Los Angeles. He's been my best friend since Sonoma State, and he invited me to come down to Los Angeles, where we lived together as roommates, and he was going to UCLA for the MFA program. And I was fortunate enough to be invited in, and we did some printmaking there together. We shared each other's studios. We were always participating in art and seeing art down in Los Angeles. And this would have been in the 2000, from 2002 to about 2010, where I come up here, when I came back to Northern California, because I had a part-time job doing wine sales and I hurt my back. Long story short, I stayed up here. That's when I moved to Glen Ellen, and I had been doing my art, as well as instead of doing the wine sales, I had gotten myself into massage therapy. That's my other job when there's not a pandemic. So in 2017, are we ready for that part, Jennifer?
We're ready for that part. For the people outside of this area who not everybody who listens to this podcast, the intention of this podcast is to help every community that has just gone through a disaster or wants to build resiliency before they go into a disaster. You know, they're looking for snapshots of how they rebuild. And so the role of the artist, I think, is underappreciated, underutilized as something that can and should be formalized into the process of resilience and recovery. But okay, they may not know that, because this may be the only podcast they're looking at, that you and I share the October 2017 wildfire disasters here in the North Bay of San Francisco. So you were living in Sonoma Valley. Talk to us about what kind of art you were doing at that time, and then go ahead and tell the story. What happened to you, Peter?
Yes. So yeah, I had a studio at my place in Glen Ellen. I was on Dunbar, a couple doors down from John Lasseter. He's the CEO for Pixar, Disney Pixar Studios. Never got to meet him. But I had been doing, so yeah, I've worked in pretty abstract and representational painting, mixed media with the drawing, the printmaking. There's sculptural pieces either on paper or in panels, smaller to mid-size, very rarely a large scale. But yeah, mostly landscape and figurative and portraiture in its nature. But I tinker with things. Big into the Rauschenberg found objects. Find something on the ground that's like something that I can recycle and put forward into my work. And it's all about building surfaces. They're psychological surfaces. So being very introspective and being very fascinated with all the ologies and isms that I'm interested in, I apply a lot of it into my process. And at the time I was living in Glen Ellen. It's a beautiful nature area. It's very quiet. The only time I ever heard anything was either like a deer outside or an acorn falling on my roof. It's just a beautiful area of the Bay Area, Valley of the Moon, Sonoma Valley. And so, yeah, I was doing a massage, and I had my little studio. I was doing a lot of abstract work, pretty non-narrative type stuff, not so much representational, but a lot of just like surface study and exploration pieces.
Well, hold on. Now, for someone who doesn't know what non-narrative stuff means, we want to make so there will probably be artists that are looking at this, even curators that are looking at this, but also just your average person who, you know, may not be fluent in the language of what it is you're talking about. So what do you mean by non-narrative?
Well, with the abstraction, it's open to interpretation. I'm not really telling a story other than depicting my process and working with surfaces, additive and deductively. So as much as that went into my paintings, a lot of it was stripped off or torn off or cut back down to its essence, much like we do in therapy psychologically, as we go back to our past and we kind of go back into those areas where we get kind of an origin or something. And for my art, I always wanted to see how I could preserve some of that past, but also letting a lot of it go. Very psychological. If that was my narrative, people won't necessarily get that. And mostly when people would see my pieces, they just like, oh, I really like that coarse texture and surface. Like, how are you doing that? So it's engaging the viewer, not so much of something I'm saying as a concept or something political or anything like that. It's more of their engagement in something beautiful. So the aesthetics of the piece.
Hey, was that your sort of your process prior to the fire, and then it served you post disaster, or did it become even more so your process because of the fire? Or how did that
More
work?
so then, more so then. Now there's a lot more narrative going on, and we'll talk about that. So yeah, I'm ready to discuss the night.
All right, well, let's hear it. Go ahead.
October
Roll
8th,
ahead through it.
2017, the bravest night of my life. Crazy night. I think most people have heard testimony from so many people, 12,000 plus. Basically, anybody who is living in Sonoma County smelling fire then is still affected. Are you familiar with the Discovery show, Cal Fire? Have you heard about this?
I just heard about it. I'm totally excited to watch it.
I am very excited. I can't wait to see that. So yeah, it was a very strange Sunday night. I'm from Southern California. I was born and raised with Santa Ana winds, with dry, high velocity, intense winds. And yet I had never felt or seen anything like that night up here in Northern California. It was so oddly dry. It was probably super low single digit humidity. And with the 50-mile-an-hour winds where I was, this had been going on.
You were on the valley floor. So just
I'm on the valley floor. Yeah, Dunbar and the 12 Dunbar and closer to Arnold. I was exactly 1 mile away from Dunbar School, the elementary school there. And so I remember watching the Monday Night Football game. I kind of had it on. I was really tired. I'd done a lot of work that day, and I was more put out about the wind, being concerned because I lived under a lot of oak trees, and I was more concerned about a tree falling on me. And so I put some earplugs in, and I kept my phone on, and thank God I did, because I'll get to how my neighbor saved me or woke me up to have me alerted to it. Otherwise, I would have probably slept through it. It was about 9:30 or so when I went to sleep, and then I get a call from my neighbor Steven. He said, "You might want to look outside the window. There's a very ominous orange glow. It's kind of cool." Nothing like, "Oh my God, there's a fire that looks like it's about maybe a few hundred yards away from us and it's coming in our direction. We should get the hell out of here." No, he was more fascinated by it. We didn't realize the magnitude of it because we couldn't quite see it because of all the trees and being so flat, being at the valley floor.
Also because, and this is really important, we'd never seen Cal Fire, never even seen a fire like this before. Like, it moved 20 miles in 5 hours. So there was no reason at that time for you to think that you were in any imminent danger, because we'd never seen a mega fire.
Never seen anything like this. I had a few fires growing up down in Orange County, where I was born and raised. I didn't grow up until I moved here. But I had witnessed fires advancing like 3 seconds, like a football field every 3 seconds. I mean, they could, that one that I remember when I was very little, I was probably about 7 years old, that took out a hill in just like seconds. But anyway, I had no realization of the actuality of the fire other than I could see the orange glow. I had it that, and it was Stephen and I and one of our other neighbors, we were outside, standing out there in the wind and debris coming everywhere. And I could see the orange glow. It looked like it was, yeah, just beyond down, kind of in the Trinity, Dunbar and 12 area in there. And I could hear all the commotion. I could hear the fire department. I could hear people yelling. And then I started hearing the big booms because a lot of people have these large propane tanks, right? So those were exploding, or cars. And so what actually had me leave was the power went out. And that must have been about 2:15. And I had it that, okay, I could hear all the commotion down there. They're going to put it out. I mean, they're not going to let the whole town of Glen Ellen burn. I mean, that one's a little hard for me to say. Wow, we can never process this stuff enough, can't we?
Can never process it enough. It's really, it's totally, you can take your time, you can breathe. It's all good. We're all good.
I've just done so much work on it, and it surprises me when there's any kind of another layer of grief that comes up, and I'm all for it. I mean, I've been doing this work since I was little. My mom put us in therapy when I was 10 years old from our family's divorce. And so I'm used to like sharing, and getting in touch with my feelings, especially as a male. So it's all been good practice for me my whole life. And there's a question about what surprised me, and we'll get to that part. So it was when the power went out and I thought, okay, I'm going to grab my gym bag because I want to go to yoga tomorrow. I'm going to grab my laptop. I had 3 laptops. So I just grabbed my main one. Got in my car and I made it out, and I couldn't quite see the fire yet. It wasn't when I turned onto Arnold Drive and with my intention to turn left to go towards Santa Rosa, because my mom lives in Montecito Heights. That was my plan. Just take my gym bag, my laptop, spend the night at my cell phone, of course. We'll spend the night at mom's, come back the next day, it'll blow over, back to business as usual. It was then where there's a police officer there, and nobody was prepared for this. And he said, you can't go that way. You have to go towards Sonoma. And I said, well, my mom lives in Montecito Heights. Can I turn to go, because I want to spend the night over at her house. And he said, just do whatever you have to do. And so I went through there, and boy, was he should have held me. He should have been maybe holding his advice a little stronger, because I barely made it through Kenwood. There were trees that had fallen down that were on fire. The telephone poles were on fire. To my right was a field of embers that had already burnt. That's the nuns area where it originated from. And then over to my left, all I saw were silhouettes of chimney stacks with the embers. And it wasn't 1 or 2 houses, but it was like a clearing. It was this apocalyptic war zone that I was like going back into history for like World War II and going through a war zone, right?
And often you see the little, they're gas lines just with flames on top.
All the gas lines.
The gas lines are very creepy after a fire.
But I realized the timeline, like, shoot, this thing had been burning while I was sleeping. This has been going on for a few hours, and it already took out that neighborhood. And that's when I had the insight, I could barely see. I did try to take a video, and it was dangerous for me to do that. I think I ended up deleting it or something like that. But it was only for like 10 seconds because I was fearing for my life. I thought something was going to fall on me, or my car was going to explode, because I could feel the heat. So that was survival mode. I've only felt imminent death like 3 times in my life. Once was surfing and once was skiing. This was the 3rd time. I really thought I was going to die, and just was vigilant and just did my best to see as best I could and drive through it. And so I made it. The second I made it through, Jennifer, my mom calls me thinking, oh, she must have heard about the fire that's going over here in Glen Ellen. No, she's calling me because she's being evacuated for a fire over there, right?
Because what most people don't know is we had 11 fires over 4 counties, and Tubbs and Nuns that fired. The 2 fires that we're referencing for your mom and for you were mega fires.
Mega.
It's all these other. Yeah. Beast.
So she's calling me and saying that she's being evacuated in Montecito Heights, and that she's taking the dog and the cat, and she's going to go over to Findlay. And I said, oh, I already said that I'm being evacuated too. And she's like, okay, well, why don't you meet me there? So I spent the night at Findlay Center, awake, with the dog and the cat. And there were some nice moments. People are amazing when they're under duress and trauma. And, there's a vulnerability and a real essence that you get to see of people. Often, really, what I experience is a very positive thing. We have a wonderful community in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County. We have a riffraff like anywhere. There were families there. There are people with other pets, and people were just so like beautifully vulnerable and transparent and just in shock. And we're all just there for the same thing that we had no preparation for.
Interestingly, Rebecca Solnit is an essayist that I really like, and she will write on a variety of different issues. Like one book she has called men explain things to me. It's hilarious. But she wrote another book called A Paradise Built in Hell. It's very much about that phenomenon that when terrible things happen, that we're always told or taught that people turn on each other. But then if you actually experience a disaster, you learn that in the midst of it, people turn towards each other. And that is that sweet spot of human vulnerability, of humanity, where it comes like the jewel of humanity shows up so beautifully in a disaster, I think largely because of our shared vulnerability. So I love that you mentioned that. All right. So you spent the night in Finley Center alongside of your mother. And I do think that it's always worth talking about the beautiful, the humanity in the center of our experiences. But tell us about the next day, or, it took a couple of weeks to be able to get back into Glen Ellen. So how long before you knew that, in fact, you're home and you're in, your lifetime of work that you had not, that was left behind? How long did that take for you to understand what had happened?
4 days. Nobody was allowed in. The wildfires went on for nearly 3 weeks.
For 23 days.
23 days, yeah.
23 days, yeah. So it took you about 4 days. And then were you able to, I can't imagine, were you able to physically go back in, or did you just understand that your house was gone and somebody else had informed you about that? And what was that moment like?
Thank you. So yeah, my mom was inside. Actually, my mom went in the car, and she was sleeping in the car, and she had the dog and cat in there with her. I was outside. I was so just strung up on adrenaline, and I was stood outside in the terrible, terrible smoke with the large pieces of debris falling from Coffee Park. Didn't really realize that what was happening. It's just like a surreal bad horror movie, but it still didn't really settle in what is actually occurring, because I can't see it. But I just remember that night being awake all night. But yeah, my mom and I ended up going back to her house, even though she was still under evacuation order. We felt like the fires pretty much passed the imminent danger for her. The story of the woman, she was in the paper twice, who saved Montecito Heights from over in Sinead area there.
Remarkable story. Older woman. I mean, it's not older like me, not like older like 51, but much older than me, who saved Montecito Heights, and really remarkable story. I agree. And I think it would have been saved the next day. And for those of you, again, who are not familiar with this fire, where Peter would be with his wife, with his mother, was somewhere in the other side of town near Coffee Park, where 1,500 homes were taken out that night. So we are not, we are talking about in total, over the course of one night, 6,000 structures being absolutely devastated. Like big planned urban developments were taken out, rural communities were taken out. The destruction was massive. So Finley Center was one of the places where people congregated to evacuate. And a lot of people have stories about Finley Center, just where the shock and the awe sets in. But then having to understand it, all of a sudden you have nothing, and you have to actually go shop from toothpaste to even vehicles. Like people had to replace a little bit of everything right away. So
yes. So thank you. The next day, I think I slept from like 6:30 or 7 in the morning when we got back to her place. I think I slept till maybe about 10:30 or 11. I'm not a late sleeper, but I was still on the adrenaline. So yeah, I needed confirmation. So I text my neighbor, Steven, and I said, "What's the status?" And his reply was, "Everything is gone."
you can take your time, Peter. It's totally fine.
yeah, it's just being back in that moment.
Mhm.
It's not now. It's that being back in that moment that's bringing up all that grief and that surge of it.
Don't you think it's good though, like how I admire the fact that you can just sit in it for a minute and let it have all the space it needs for a minute. And I think it's important too for people who do listen to this who think, well, I'm just going to manage, like self-manage my way through this grief, and that's not exactly how this works. This isn't like anything else, and it just because, we're 3 years and 3 months past the actual event, but until you go through it, until you not only confront sort of the mortality of it, the imminent mortality of it, but also it's huge. It's interesting because people love to watch these movies, and I've never been like such a fan of disaster films. Twister was pretty good, but other than that, I'm not really into it. I don't like dystopian. I don't like anything dystopian, Mad Max, nothing like that. But it's sort of the closest you come, and you do find yourself in the middle of like a bad movie that you never asked to be in, and it's so much deeper, and it's like a land of 1,000 heroes and a million tears at the same time. It's very difficult. So I admire the fact that you are willing to sit in it and have a moment. And I think, and we're fine with it here right now, just so you know. Fine.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Actually, I have something to interject on that. I just had an insight, something that I've been exploring since then. I'm particularly fortunate. I'm built very differently than a lot of people when it comes to the PTS. I recover faster than most people. Maybe it's through my values, and one of them being creativity. I've always been a person that I don't want to hold on to the things that make me unhappy. Freedom is one of my highest values and the importances of my life, and my power and my ability to be creative and to be able to have joy and to be able to be grateful. And if I'm holding on, and if I haven't addressed something, and I know how to do that, as I just demonstrated there, it's psychosomatic. The mind thinks, the body feels, and neither do both. And so I've been able to get pretty clever and somewhat masterful in managing myself in those areas and the worlds of self. And yet was just striking to me that to feel that grief as I felt 6 months. It took me about 6 months to get that grief out, and we can get to that. So much started to transpire and unfold for me, Jennifer, in the next particularly year, on so many levels, so many areas and aspects of my life. It was a Thursday, and I went back through my Lita and kind of got around the police barriers and was able to get onto the 12. And just as I was able to get on the 12, they were doing backburns behind Ledson and some of the wineries back in there. Maybe it was St. Francis. I don't remember. It's right. It's back in the lower hills there, where they actually just burned again this last year. Mm-hmm. I was able to get to my property on that Thursday, and that I did take a video. I think I have it somewhere. But it's me going down my driveway, and sure enough, complete leveling of just white ash debris and just some pipes. The copper pipe, I think, doesn't burn until like 3,800 degrees, and it has the highest tolerance to heat, right? So I just knew to be with it. And I wanted to get some grief out. I wanted to get some emotion because I was so vigilant, so much in my head. And I could feel nothing about it. I didn't like what I saw, and I just sat with it. And I spent a couple hours there. And I sat with it, from the loss and the complete destruction, something happened. Something shifted. I'm an artist. I'm a creative. I see beauty in everything. the loss and the debris and the rubble, it presented itself as an art store of free art supplies. And then I got started getting these insights. Oh, wait a minute. If everything is lost and I can't make art, could I make art out of that? I mean, I never really followed fire art until getting these insights out of it. And I knew what I was going to be doing out of all this for the next 3 months until the debris removal service dug 6 feet into the property and took everything, my free art store away. So for about 3 months, I was making trips with bags and boxes, and with the mindset that the ash was going to be my new paint. Black ash, white ash, grays, some really beautiful earth tones.
Navigating the recovery process after a fire is challenging, particularly with the additional issues caused by COVID-19. Fannie Mae is here to help. If you live in a FEMA-declared disaster area, you can request free assistance from our Disaster Response Network. Fannie Mae, in partnership with Maury Management International's Project Porchlight, launched the Disaster Response Network in 2018. This program uses HUD-approved counselors to offer support. These counselors have been specially trained as disaster coaches. They address the challenges homeowners and renters face when recovering from a disaster. There's no charge for their services. The goal of the Disaster Response Network is to help people return to pre-disaster normal as quickly as possible. Clients are matched with a coach who work with them one-on-one throughout their recovery. In the initial conversation with clients, coaches review the status of the homeowner's recovery process, including current challenges, decisions that need to be made, and immediate long-term goals. They discuss topics like income and expenses, insurance, housing, credit or debt challenges, as well as aid or other assistance programs that may be available. This may include FEMA applications and Small Business Administration, or SBA, loans. The coach helps the client plan and prioritize the next steps for their recovery. Moving forward, the coach continues to be there for the client, reaching out to them regularly, at least monthly, but more often when needed, for up to 18 months' time. These regular check-ins provide the client the opportunity to ask questions, get help tackling challenges, and keep things moving as they work through their recovery. It's also where coaches can help identify new recovery assistance or grants that have become available, strategize new next steps for recovery, and talk through difficult decisions or priorities. One of the key ways coaches assist Disaster Response Network clients is by helping intervene when something has gone awry. Coaches will, with the clients on the line, call insurance companies to adjust their claims when costs exceed initial estimates, or call the client's creditors to request payment relief. The Disaster Response Network's approach ensures survivors have a personal financial expert working with them throughout their recovery. By helping minimize the financial impact of a disaster, survivors can recover more quickly. To get confidential disaster relief assistance, call the Disaster Response Network at 877-833-1746. Once again, that is 877-833-1746. Or visit knowyouroptions.com/relief for more information.
The ash that comes out of a wildfire is highly toxic. And
Absolutely.
it is everything that was in your house is absolutely reduced to 3 inches usually of oily ash. And but people do go back and they do sifting, and there are sifting kits, and you have a mask, and there are protocols to do it. And so I just have to say that we are in no way endorsing taking that ash with you, but we do know that we do trust that Peter employed the right protocols to keep his health.
I did. I covered myself well. I wore gloves. I had an N100 mask. I wore goggles, closed goggles. Probably not perfect, but I mean, you can't keep an artist down. And yes, I understand that we have to be responsible for the viewership and the audience. Oh, I'm just going to go roll around in the ash now. No, highly toxic stuff. Highly. I mean, there's fiberglass, there's glass, and that's the kind of the smoke that we've been breathing. You know that 80% of the persons from 9/11, the Manhattan 9/11, have 80% of them have respiratory conditions from what they breathe.
I'm not surprised. And I just posted a study on our social media yesterday that talked about the role of wildfire in all of the pollution that we've taken in. And so we can be a totally other podcast, but it's so interesting to me that in our zeal to have cleaner air, we suppressed these wildfires for about 70 years. And in the meanwhile, we ended up with 70 years of pollution in 3 years. So it's just one of those things that has to be changed, and we have to go more to a Native American sense of it. But so talk to me about, just in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we get into what you started to create with what you found.
Yes, thank you. That was right where I was. So with the ash, I then started finding remnant objects. Found some of my old sculpture. I just bought some pumpkins. It was nearing Halloween, and Halloween's always been one of my favorite holidays. And the fires, one of them, it was burning, and it left this beautiful biomorphic shape type sculpture. And the planks of wood, I had the insight, I'm going to do the American flag. The American flag representing, disaster and tragedy and patriotism, and I'm going to use that flag motif that Jasper Johns came up with in the early 1950s as my composition, as he did. Not so much about patriotism, but more of it's a composition and also how it ties into art history. And so I knew I was going to do flags. The planks of wood I would cut into strips. That'd be like the stripes. And then I knew doing my mixed media that the backdrop would be the mixed media. And then from there, they became a barbecue motif to kind of have some playfulness and some humor, kind of tinker with it, like it's not all serious. But the planks of wood, I got that idea when I had longitudinal cuts. I also cross-sectional cut the planks of wood. And when I cut it, it looked like an overly well-done piece of filet meat. I mean, it looked just like it. It was charred on the outside and it had the texture. And then the floral motifs was like the pumpkin. And then I was finding glass remnant pieces as well as, let's see, the flower, the rags. I had a stack of rags. Yeah.
So I have to brag because when we opened our office, we were so lucky to be able to hold Peter's art for a year, and I still have some of his pieces, but he did this triptych that every time somebody would come in, they would be sort of drawn to it in particular, and it was like a 3 roses essentially, and one was of rags, one was of light bulbs, and the other was the pumpkin that you spoke of, and people were fascinated by that. It was very textural, it had depth to it. So I would just, for those of you who are not artists and you're not like following along for how exactly, I just wanted you to know that we will provide a link for to Peter's art. You'll be able to see all of these pieces, but I do know that of all of the art that we've ever had in this office, that was the one, that triptych was the thing that always drew the most attention and questions and admiration.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and that fire exit, I love how you were honoring it, and you love that.
I felt a little bad because you were like, it should go up here by your door. And I was like, but I love it so much.
But no.
Well, by the way, you can purchase that from Peter because it's not mine. It's on loan. And next time, and while you're talking, I'm going to actually, don't get distracted. I'm going to get up and I'm going to bring it over here. We're going to look at it together, like because there's a playfulness and a humor and a seriousness in how you take these found pieces from this bad thing, and then you turn them into something else that can be sort of reused, but that is very playful. So
that's it. Yeah. So that was my Wi-Fi box.
Let's get it.
But it's now a fire exit sign.
So, okay. This, I'm just going to show people and then you can talk about it. So it says fire exit. And then when you turn it, this was, I'm just going to talk so that it will stay on my camera. This is his cable box, and I absolutely see there's where the cable mamma jammas would have gone in. I think that's the technical term, cable mamma jammas.
Nice. I did not know that.
But this is it, and it lives over my shoulder for every podcast that we've had so far. But this is this sort of playfulness that Peter brings to, and you need this from artists. Artists have such an important role to play in how we recover and heal and find perspective and connection post-disaster, even if the art is temporal. Even if, it's playful or serious or written art, like graphic art, like Brian Fees did with the Fire Story, artists have an incredibly important role to play. And that's one of the reasons why, Peter, you are my first artist guest on purpose, because I'm going to go put this back though. So you can talk about it while I put it back.
Great. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You got it. Jennifer, should I tell them how we met?
Yeah.
Is that relevant?
I see. Yes. Tell them how we met.
So I cold called Jennifer Gray Thompson with the Rebuild Foundation, North Bay Rebuild Foundation. I had accomplished about 28 mixed media pieces of fire art at the time when I went in with a presentation. I had kind of a layout of pictures and telling her my story, and that I was wanting to accrue 3 different nonprofits, and I wanted her to be one of them. And she gave me some great feedback, some great coaching. And did you accept it? You had actually given me a little reconsideration in how I was going to redirect the 15% proceeds. But then
I do remember sitting with you in our old offices and, going through and, but one of our philosophies, or mine has been in the running of Rebuild, that I love investing in really great people with really smart ideas. And I thought that your idea was really great, but my concern was that you had just lost everything, and you were creating these really beautiful pieces. I didn't want you to give so much away. I think your initial idea was like 50% or something, and I was saying, you don't need to give that much away. Right. I just didn't think that was the best way financially for you to go. Right. I wanted you to protect you.
I cut it way back down to 5 anyway. But that's the work has been not so much a selling point. It's been more of a showing point. But yes, you called me months afterwards, and I just felt so grateful that I had gone in there and asserted myself, and I was being rewarded by you saying, by the way, we have a new office, and I'd be honored, and are you interested in bringing some of the artwork? And it was just great. It's just been great ever since. Yeah.
I think so too. But it was also that I wanted you, and then I wanted you to meet Rena Folletti, who was the curator for all of the art in our office, except for a photograph of us in GC, is all made by, is all fire art. And I think that's very important. It was my theory from the beginning that if anyone who walks in here or works here, they have to have experienced a disaster, or I don't want them to work here because I can't explain what it's like. And the other side is to keep central to our focus and our thesis that we don't get too bogged down in what happens. Like, we're not firefighters. We can help with resiliency. Our job is to make something good come out of it. Yes. And I think you and I have always been very aligned in that sense. It's one of the things I enjoy so much about you as a person, but also the role of art in a disaster. So can you talk a little bit about that? So what do you have to say for a community or somebody who's like, say, a city manager or a funder who's sitting down and they're deciding, what are we going to fund here? What are we going to prioritize, especially in our first year post-disaster? Talk about the role of the artist and why that function is so critical.
Well, you called me a second responder. I never heard that term before for an artist. And I've long thought about that pretty on a deep level of what that looks like, how that consists. The fact that I was there to cry over the loss of my property, where it turned into something else. It was an unveiling. It was this birthing, the phoenix rising of insight and inspiration, and not just hope, but like a real direction. I could see what it was actually going to look like. I knew I was going to do the flags. And so when I was going through the debris, I was looking to see, will that fit that art? I was so clear, and I'm very excited, and a lot of energy, a lot of drive. I've had more drive from out of this series from that incident than I have drawing a portrait of a beautiful woman or a landscape, beautiful landscape, sun. I just felt so driven for so many months there, and it was just pouring out of me. I mean, I couldn't keep up with myself. It was like my best problem I've ever had. I couldn't sleep. I just was so driven and so excited to do the work. Some of the other parts of it, though, yeah, for how your question, I'm sorry, clarify.
My question is really
how does it work for the people, or?
Right. So I definitely set this up because I wanted you to share your personal story, because I think it's the personal stories that so much draws together and show the humanity of it. I never like to show anybody like, oh, I just got from A to B and I produced these beautiful pieces of art. Because that's the way that it is. And then I think that it doesn't provide a roadmap for others about how to get to that place.
Yeah, we all have our own way. My way is not the next person's way necessarily. We all have different timing and means of coping. This is not my first severe lesson in adversity. My brother committed suicide 6 years ago. My stepdad passed, or 7 years ago, 5 years ago for my stepdad. I've lost things, and at very deep levels. One of the authors that I revisit was Thomas More, Dark Night of the Soul. You gotta face that resistance, and it's resistance. It's the resistance that we have for ourselves, but also there's a resistance that's being met, and we have to push into that resistance, and that resistance is the dark tunnel that Thomas More talks about. And if we don't do that, there's no growth. Now, some people, they don't want to grow. They just want to stay the same, and God bless them. That's their path. That's their journey. It's been set that,
Peter, don't you think, right, though, like in a disaster, that even whether or not you lost your home, that any community that goes through disaster, you are disaster affected, you are fire affected. There isn't an escape from what happened. You cannot pretend it didn't happen. And
right.
Part of, like, we did a whole podcast on mental health. I think that for mental and spiritual health, that I hope that newly fire affected communities or newly disaster affected communities, that they consider always placing the artist at the center of healing, especially that first year, because it's often a time when words will not suffice, and you need markers as you go to say, to show people when they walked into our office and they could see that this artist had used what had happened to create beauty. And we have about 6 artists that work here, but to say, oh, wow, it was big. It's important enough to actually put your energy into creating art. But I would also hope that funders would consider more seriously, how do you fund art post-disaster? What can it do for a community? Because there is no, like, if you have it in the normal course of life, if you want to ignore stuff, well, good luck with that. Number one, that's not going to work anyway. But then you put in a disaster in the center of it, and there is no ignoring what happens like the trauma of a disaster. You don't have to live in it for the rest of your life, but not dealing with it is something that just isn't an option.
I think where you're at with this question. I understand now. So yeah, it wasn't all peaches and roses and making art and creativity for Peter. It was I was having to be very responsible about stuff. I applied for artist grants. I got a number of them. I'll just mention a couple. The Joe Mitchell Foundation. There's the Change the Robert Washburn Foundation, as also the Brit, I'm sorry for, I'm not remembering the name, but no, I did a lot of applying for funding and for grants. And that was big for my financial. Now, at this time, I was put into a FEMA RV over at the Sonoma County Fairgrounds. And it was, yeah, I stayed with my mom for a couple of months there. And then that's when FEMA had arranged for a number of us that were still displaced or unresolved, however, that they put it in a bunch of FEMA RVs at the Santa Rosa Fairgrounds. And that was a very tough 18 months for me. I was very unhappy. And I spent most of my, if not every evening, out having happy hour and wine. I leaned on a lot of wine for a good couple of years there. Never to get drunk. It was more something that I could do. I had 2 glasses. Rarely would I have 3. Sometimes I would. And there's a number of restaurants that I became like a regular at, you know, like Norm coming into Cheers, you know, hey Norm. Yeah, I leaned on that in my coping. And yet right after the fires, the LAC Center over at the Press Democrat, that's where FEMA came in, Salvation Army, Catholic Charities.
So it's called a local assistance center.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it was an emergency post for the fire survivor folks to go in and get their stuff put back together. Driver's license, taxes. I took care of all that. I was very diligent, very earnest about that for a good couple of weeks.
I'm looking to you, Peter, for some words or guidance. And the podcast is called How to Disaster. And in part, what we're trying to do is sort of memorialize and encapsulate some of the lessons that we learned in 2017 and the 3+ years since then, with the hope that communities that maybe we can't get to, or you have somebody who's just sort of Googling it, who's just undergone a disaster, they're an artist, or they are a city manager or a county supervisor, and they're thinking, what are some of the tools that I can use in order to help my community come back? And what we want to put forth in this podcast is that art is a major tool for how to come back from a disaster and how to heal. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. Really tough with the COVID still going on. And yet, I think the word is really preparation. In 2017, nobody was really prepared. I think California, counties, cities, and nonprofits and persons like yourself, you've learned a lot since 2017. We know more now how to live that we did not know then.
And what I think about a lot is that you brought healing back into the community, healing for yourself, but also to the community through your art. We're not the only place where your art appeared. It also appeared in City Hall in Santa Rosa. And so how does one prepare as an artist for a disaster, but after it happened, how does one contribute towards the healing of a community? And so it's like in a toolkit for artistry, the role of art in a disaster.
Right. Well, you mentioned how we're second responders and that we have opportunity, and that needs to be supported, right? So how can others support other artists? I don't feel like I have a lot of really understanding to that. I don't know if I have a real great answer or a lot of clarity or understanding on how I can answer that. Maybe you know something about me that I'm missing that you could tell me, then give me the answer, and then let me see if I can go with it.
Okay, so the way that I have seen you,
say again,
the way that I see it is that this disaster happened, and you lost a lot. Quite frankly, you lost more than I did in that disaster. You did,
right?
And
all my path.
But what you did is that you literally went through and scraped through the remnants of what was left, and then created beauty, and then you shared it with the world. And then one of your first instincts was, how can how can you benefit a greater public sphere even more by doing donations, which is how you ended up in my office. It's that sort of instinct to create beauty out of, quite frankly, what was an absolute shit experience, and turn it into something that made the world a little more beautiful, a little better. It's one of the things that, we're trying to do in a totally different way. And I think that artists have a role where they can almost put that effort or that instinct into being, like, through the physical beauty. Like, I love your fire exit sign that's in here, or the public art. I love the guy who did the murals on the homes in Paradise of the people who had lived there.
How about this? How about if it's not loss, it's adversity? And adversity is really a catalyst. Can it be? Like the crisis that's been going on for the last year, that really, it's been a long time coming. What happened on Wednesday, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's been 4 years in the makings. What's going on with our environmental crisis, as the UN's calling it a catastrophic crisis. It's not just wildfires in California and this part of the country. It's hurricanes, it's the rising waters, the polar bears that don't have ice and they are swimming the land.
Did you notice this year, though, in particular, I feel like I have leaned more on artists in the sense of comedians, songwriters, people who are singing songs on YouTube who wrote or recorded those 40 years ago, people who are turning our very painful, crunchy, scary time into like snippets of beauty that I feel are sustaining so much of this country and this world.
Yeah.
I think it's the same.
Well, for the second responders, I mean, we need to be supported. People need to have as like an importance to be viewers of it. Like, I'm not a musician, but I love music and I support other musicians. I love to cook myself. I love to go out and I appreciate other people's cooking. It's just even being interested in somebody else's thought or their perspective on it, not just mine. It's being interested in each other. And art, you're right. A lot of my immediate community did not take to my artwork. It's a revisit of trauma. When they look at these pieces, some of them, they're reminded that it's somebody's house that burnt down, and it can be somewhat unsettling for some viewers. And then I've had where a woman came up to me crying in tears, and she was so just rocked her whole world and how grateful that I did that work. And she was so moved. It was like a real process for her own. That surprised me a bit. And then the other is like, oh yeah, this is really important. And wow, how did you know to do this? Who does this? I mean, who makes art out of their burnt home and then turn it into something else? Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it's okay. It's good. It's good. I just want to say that, Peter, the thing that I really, this has been a tough 3+ years for a lot of people. It's been hard to run a nonprofit startup after an unprecedented disaster. And the one thing that I hold many things that I'm proud of and many things that I hold dear to my heart. And, having encountered you is certainly one of those things for sure, that I have a lot of respect for the quality of your heart and the quality of your optimism and the determination to continue to connect in incredibly difficult times and to not shy away from that which is painful, but instead to say, yep, that was painful, that was not good, and here's something beautiful. And I wish that the world had far more Peters in it, but I'll take the one that I know and be grateful for him. Oh. And thank you for spending this time with me.
Total huge acknowledgement. I totally got it. Thank you. And reciprocally, you are very highly valued and important to me as well.
You're a good soul.
Huge support. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for joining us on How to Disaster, a playbook to recover, rebuild, and reimagine. I want to leave you with this one thought. Thank you for spending your time with us. And we want you to know that you can get through this. You can recover, rebuild, and reimagine. But there's only one way you're going to do it, and that's together.